The year was 2007. Phantasy Star Universe had been out for a year and had just shipped its expansion, Ambition of the Illuminous. And Sega might have been a bit unsure of what to do next. After all, this was a weird era for online-centric titles on consoles. DLC was just becoming a thing, and we were just entering an era where these console titles could even be regularly updated and kept in service for many years in a fashion akin to the MMOs of the time or the live service games of today. PSU would continue to be updated, but would not receive the kind of frequent, massive content additions that Phantasy Star Online 2 and New Genesis would get, and it only got the one expansion. But crucially, the game would not be constantly ported and re-released in different versions like the original Phantasy Star Online, instead content to drift along with what content updates it did receive. So what else would be done with the series while Phantasy Star Universe was ongoing? Well, I think they had a bit of inspiration from another series. A series that was itself inspired by Phantasy Star Online. But while this series did begin trying to be an online-focused console RPG, back when being an online-focused console game was itself novel, it wouldn't find much success at this until 2018. Yes, it was Monster Hunter. See, classic Monster Hunter's success and impact is something that is quite often overlooked, being in the shadow of the massive success of World's 20 million plus sales. And, the fact that most of classic Monster Hunter's success and impact were in Japan, so you're just not going to see as much acknowledgement of it in English-speaking communities. But classic Monster Hunter was quite a big deal, especially on the PlayStation Portable, where it was absolutely the killer app in Japan. Here's the best example I can give. According to Wikipedia's list of best-selling PlayStation Portable games, the best-selling game, 8 million sales. Okay, well, that's a Grand Theft Auto game. Not helping me here, but look, this was an era where GTA games were topping sales charts, and usually by quite a bit. Back when GTA games actually came out. But in second place, with 4.9 million sales, Monster Hunter Portable third. A game that never even had an official release outside of Japan. The second-gen portable Monster Hunter titles also sit in the top 10, and Monster Hunter Freedom still breaks 1 million sales and manages to land 16th. Not bad at all on a console whose best-selling games list only has 24 games that even broke 1 million sales. And so in light of Monster Hunter finding, or creating, a massive audience for this kind of game on the PlayStation Portable, there were many other co-op action RPG franchises springing up on the platform, all wanting a slice of that pie. Most famously God Eater, which I should really play and cover someday. But this is, of course, the answer to the question of what to do with Phantasy Star while Universe was still going strong. Or maybe this is all just a coincidence. I am kind of speculating here, but I would be shocked if Monster Hunter had no influence on Sega's decision to start making handheld spin-offs to Phantasy Star at this time. Since, as mentioned with God Eater, it wouldn't be the only group of developers taking cues from Monster Hunter. And Phantasy Star's several ventures onto handhelds would make the PSU era of the franchise one of the most exciting and active. But don't get too excited just yet. The first handheld outing, which we'll be covering today, was a fairly straightforward port of Phantasy Star Universe with a few twists. Markedly less exciting than the later handheld titles, even if it is technically impressive. But it's a Phantasy Star Online title, so I gotta cover it even if there's not a lot to say. And with that in mind, this is very much a sequel to my Phantasy Star Universe video, and if you haven't watched that, okay, I know it's long, but you really should watch it, because so much of this video is specifically talking about how things changed or didn't change, mostly the latter, from Phantasy Star Universe. Because being primarily a port of Phantasy Star Universe is both the most impressive thing about this game, and its biggest weakness. So let's get into it. So first, let's start with the gameplay. Yeah. More than anywhere else, this is just Phantasy Star Universe. To the point where I sometimes forget I'm not playing Phantasy Star Universe. And, so long as I haven't played PSU in a little bit and don't notice the obvious and inevitable graphical downgrades. Still, it's pretty cool that they managed to fit Phantasy Star Universe onto the PSP with so few compromises. Maybe a side benefit of having already fit the game onto the PS2. There are a few improvements though, like there's more photon arts than in the base game offline modes. The missions are, or at least they feel like, they're a bit shorter to fit with being on a handheld, and probably the biggest gameplay upgrade, Naked got nerfed to no longer have a chance to instant kill, which is very much appreciated. You'll still die instantly in other ways, mostly getting multi-hit from full health to 0 in a few frames, but hey, these story missions don't lock off scape dolls like Ambition of the Illuminous' story missions did, so there's that. And also, if you do fail, while you still have to restart the mission, you no longer get sent back to load your last save. You're returned to the lobby, as is more typical for these sorts of games, and much more in line with how the online has always worked. But aside from these few changes, this is still a Phantasy Star Universe. Your opinion on this game will probably be the same as your opinion of Phantasy Star Universe. There's very little that will change your mind if you didn't like that title, but if you did, well, I still do consider impressive that I'm often able to forget I'm not playing Phantasy Star Universe in the moment-to-moment gameplay, despite this game originally releasing for a handheld. So that's something, right? And I did enjoy Phantasy Star Universe, so don't take this as being too harsh. As for the classes and systems, well, there's a little bit more here. Just a little, though. We keep the dichotomy between basic and advanced classes from Phantasy Star Universe's online mode, making this the only time we get the advanced class system in an offline mode. But instead of the 7 from base PSU and 12 from AOTI, we get 5. There's Spy Master, Gun Master, and Master Force, specialists in the 3 combat styles as you'd expect, and then Pro Transer and Acro Master, which are generalists that are focused on two-handed and one-handed weapons respectively. Though it is worth knowing that these are not the master classes as they were in Phantasy Star Universe, despite for some reason, presumably just to screw with people, using the same names. Because in Phantasy Star Universe, the master classes were hyper-specialized classes that only used a narrow subset of their combat style and had some unique mechanics to them. Instead, they play much more like the upgraded version of the base classes found in Ambition of the Illuminous offline. In fact, all the classes are some degree of generalists here, with every class able to use techniques, unlike in Phantasy Star Universe's online. So, similar to Phantasy Star Universe offline, the overall feel of the game is more like the original PSO, where you can and should use a bit of everything. So I can at least say this gives Portable a bit of its own identity. Or, well, that it's a more fleshed out version of the identity of the offline modes that came before it. So while I struggle to call this area an upgrade from Phantasy Star Universe, at least the online mode, I can at least say that it is unique from Phantasy Star Universe. And now the grab bag of other changes. Well, first off, there's the streamlined upgrading system. There's no more chance of failure, thankfully, and upgrade grinders are no longer split based on the weapon rank they work on, which I do think I like. The ranked grinders in Phantasy Star Universe were an ideal with potential. Maybe the thought was that this way you wouldn't just save them for late game gear and would actually bother to upgrade gear throughout it, but because of the emphasis on crafting systems, including to get the grinders, it was generally more work than just getting better gear, especially in all of the iterations of PSU I've played. They also axe crafting entirely, and in its place we have a well-paced and decently generous random drop system for loot. Even in the early game, you'll find the occasional rare weapon that makes getting stuff fun. Phantasy Star Universe's crafting system didn't add much beyond tedium, so even if I didn't hate it while playing PSU, I'm probably happier with it gone. Less great of a removal, though, is the removal of lobby areas, replaced with static backgrounds with some nodes you can select to talk to people or use shops. They're basically slightly spiced up menus. Very similar to how Persona 3 Portable did this, actually. But that's mostly it. While the changes are nice, they're not huge either. There really aren't any crazy new additions. So lastly, and certainly not least, the story. First off, it's pretty short. Phantasy Star Universe's base game offline and Ambition of the Illuminous single player each took me about 25 hours. This took me about 15, and might have been closer to 12, but I got stuck on the final boss, so I had to grind a few levels and then replay the last mission. Of course, this is with more experience than when I played PSU offline, plus with no crafting systems to take up my time, but it is still definitely much shorter. Though in a surprising twist, despite this being a PlayStation Portable game, I'd say that presentation is overall better than in Ambition of the Illuminous. While most of the story content is in a visual novel style, there are some proper cutscenes with voice acting again, like the base game offline, though not nearly as numerous. Still, this is one of the better stories in the Gerhal saga. Set between Phantasy Star Universe and Ambition of the Illuminous, it has you investigating signs of seed reemergence with the help of your new partner, a recently manufactured cast named Vivienne. It does a good job of tapping into and building upon the world building already present, plus there are lots of small character moments in short scenes that you can encounter just by moving through the overworld menus, which, well, I think any video game story with a large cast needs optional side events like these to showcase the characters a bit more. It is a nice addition, but it isn't quite enough to offset probably the biggest downside here, which is the aforementioned short length. The game is only 8 chapters long, so there's not really room for enough story beats. This is compared to 12 chapters in the base game offline, or 10 for Ambition of the Illuminous' offline mode that was only half of a story. You start off with the same familiar story beats of hitting up the colony plus the 3 main planets to become familiar with them. Then you have a sort of mid-game status quo, and then the climax of the story sneaks up on you with only one mission to reveal the big twist, and then a single mission to resolve the entire plot. The story feels rushed, needing both more time to develop things and get you attached to Vivienne, as well as more breathing room to slow things down and make the story feel more epic. Maybe some of this is just down to its status as an interquel, though it feels squeezed between 2 other stories. And also, perhaps because of this lack of time, the game is short on new characters too. It's just Vivienne, really, plus the antagonist, who I think may have also appeared in Ambition of the Illuminous' Episode 3 plot, but I didn't get to play that one. But this is kind of unfortunate when taken together with PSU Episode 2 having the same problem of barely adding any new characters, because using the same familiar cast members every time makes the Guardians feel like a rather small organization, something that directly detracts from the quality world building and sense of scale of the Gerhal games. But of course, the worst thing about the game's story, there are none of the anime opening, ending, and next episode previews that the base PSU offline mode had. Truly an unforgivable absence. Still, the story was enjoyable enough, and it was easy to breeze through over a weekend. Certainly not the worst Phantasy Star Universe story I've played. That would be AOTI Offline's story, with all its problems and incomplete nature. Though neither of those are the worst story we'll cover on this series, we'll get to those. But the story was good enough, and I'd still rather have a story like this that is a quick shot through that you can finish in a weekend, rather than a story that pads itself out, not with interesting character moments, but just with mindless filler in order to be longer. So for now, let's get to the conclusion. So, where is Phantasy Star Portable at? Well, gameplay-wise, this is the best version of Phantasy Star Universe to play offline because it was made for offline play and local multiplayer, unlike the others where these modes are at best side content thrown in because they were in an era where you couldn't have an online-only game on consoles. The photon art selection and class system aren't as abridged as they were in Phantasy Star Universe's offline modes, and in fact, if we didn't have Phantasy Star Universe private servers, I could easily recommend this game as the best way to experience the gameplay of Phantasy Star Universe. Or, even back in the day, it would be a good option if you didn't have the money for the monthly fee, or just didn't have any of the consoles PSU was on, but did have a PSP. But now, we are in an era where whether you choose to play Phantasy Star Universe or Phantasy Star Portable, you'll probably be playing it on your PC, and there's no monthly fee to pay for the private servers. So this all makes Phantasy Star Portable harder to recommend today. Still, it is the best offline Phantasy Star Universe experience, and probably also the best option if you want to get a taste for the Gerhal saga in a timely fashion, without the dozens of hours needed to get truly stuck into Phantasy Star Universe online. And there's plenty to do if you really want to play this over PSU, for whatever reason. There's leveling up and farming gear as usual, along with chasing various titles, or basically achievements, for unique rewards and trying to get your hands on some of the rarer photon arts. The thing is, I just don't feel especially inspired to pursue these goals, since improved as it is over the other offline modes, the moment-to-moment gameplay is still inferior to PSU Online. There's definitely fun to be had, farming for rares and grinding for titles, but I feel like I would have just as much fun, if not more fun, just spinning up a new account on the PSU private server. I can make a somewhat stronger argument if you're really invested in the story and world building of Gerhal. I do think it does a great job with the storyline, and it helps that it focuses on a cast as the effective main character, and a little bit of how their mechanical nature affects what they are and how they interact with the world around them. So I guess that's how I can recommend it. If you want a dose of PSU over the weekend without committing to the many hours of online mode, Portable is great for that. But if you want something you can really sink your teeth into and get invested over the long term, or just want the best possible experience, well, PSU private servers exist now, and they remove a lot of the situations where you'd want to play Portable instead. And I guarantee that next time I want a fix for this kind of game, I'll go back to PSU Online instead. In fact, I already have. Still, while I did put in some time after being in the story mode, I didn't play it extensively, so if there's some hidden brilliance that requires 100 hours of investment first, let me know. But in the absence of such a thing, I'd much rather spend that time on Phantasy Star Universe. And that's that. But while Portable was not the most inspiring, it was just the start of the handheld PSO games. The next few titles would be far more unique and experimental, using their nature as lower-budget handheld titles with less writing on them, to explore combat that leaned more towards being action games with RPG systems, rather than RPG games with action combat, both for the better and for the worse. And what better way to begin a journey in a new direction than by starting over from zero? But that will have to wait for next time. For now, this is Mikhail, signing off.